We have made it to week 2 of Halloween Hidden Gems, a little limited series that's ongoing up until we reach Halloween itself, where every week I try to highlight a horror movie or a spooky movie that I really enjoy that I think falls more into the lesser known obscure category. Week 1, we covered Skinamarink, and week 2, we were actually talking about one of my favorite movies of all time. Probably is my favorite horror film of all time, even though it's a little bit comedy, a little bit satire. I am talking, of course, about The Return of the Living Dead.
No, that's the army. You know what the goddamn army around this place? Think! What are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? We're gonna call the boss. Bert, Frank, we have a little problem.
Which is a punk rock zombie horror film that has a little bit of comedy flavor mixed in there. It's almost like this was like the OG Shaun of the Dead. And I will admit that I think it's less on the obscure side. I think because it came out in 1985, if you want to talk about it now in 2025, I think a decent amount of people have potentially heard of this, maybe even seen it, but I think it's still to this day, because of when it came out, it always was overshadowed by the Romero zombie films, which is a shame because this movie is just, when you think about it in terms of just a pure horror film, a zombie movie, it was quite innovative and ahead of its time. And the little bit of cool history behind it is, so when George Romero did Night of the Living Dead, he co-wrote that movie with a gentleman named John Russo. And once the filming and was completed and they released Night of the Living Dead, George Romero and this John Russo had this big legal back and forth for years that ends up culminating in John Russo, for whatever reason, receiving the proprietary rights to use the phrase Living Dead in a movie title, which explains why after Night of the Living Dead, George Romero goes on to do Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, versus Dawn of the Living Dead. And it's a shame because if you step back and you look at the two careers of George Romero and John Russo, you will quickly identify that John Russo is a bit of a hack. And years after Night of the Living Dead, John Russo writes the script for a film called The Return of the Living Dead, which ends up being purchased by a studio solely for the fact that they really wanted the name on the cover of the script. They thought audiences are going to be able to connect Night of the Living Dead to a film called The Return of the Living Dead. It's going to do well for us in terms of box office revenue. But in terms of the actual script that John Russo had written, they literally rewrote everything from page 1 onward because his original script was so bad. And the beauty of the movie, as I had said before, is that there's so much innovation in the zombie genre that is happening in this movie that just largely goes unnoticed, I think, because it does have this kind of like, there's this goofiness to it where it's not fully taking itself seriously, although it is first and foremost a horror movie. There is plenty of legitimate creepiness, graphic violence. So we'll dive into the plot. So the gist of this film is that at its core, you have this group of punk rock. I think they're supposed to be like late teens, maybe early 20s, these kind of like deadbeat kids who they all pile into this dude's car. He's got this like shitty convertible, and his name is Suicide. And they are just looking for a place to party while they wait for their friend to get off of work. Now, their friend, a gentleman by the name of Freddie, is having his first shift at a medical supply warehouse, and he's working with his uncle. His uncle's name is Frank. And so as we follow Freddie in the beginning, when he starts his shift of work at this supply warehouse, his uncle's giving him a tour of everything that they sell. And this ranges from mundane things like bandages and crutches, and they have like full body model like skeletons that you would sell to like a university or a school or a hospital for educational purposes. But they also have a lot of really weird and very edgy medical stuff. Like they have a freezer where they have actual human cadavers being stored. There are these I think it's called a vivisection of a dog. So it's like literally these small dogs that have been, if you picture a tiny little dog and then a laser just cuts it in half right down the middle so that you can see all of like the organs inside of the dog, and then I guess they preserve that somehow, and you would sell that as like a model. They have things like that. And then as Frank, as I said, he's giving Freddie the tour during his first night. He starts kind of telling him this story. He's like, "Hey, have you ever seen the Night of the Living Dead?" Which again, it's like, I don't know this for a fact, but it's, this obviously came out before Scream, which is a movie where the characters in the film are like aware of the fact that there are horror movies in existence, right? It kind of breaks that fourth wall. And Return of the Living Dead was doing that back in 1985, where you have Frank and he's like, "Have you ever seen that movie Night of the Living Dead?" He's telling him that in reference to these zombies. And then Frank tells Freddie about, in the basement of this warehouse, there are these big drum barrels that the army mistakenly shipped to this warehouse. And they are barrels full of like, they have cadavers / some sort of chemical weapon is being housed in these barrels. And so Frank takes Freddie down into the basement, and on the top of these barrels there's a small little like window so that you can see inside, and then he can clearly see that there is a cadaver kind of postured and being stored inside of the barrel. They chit chat for a moment, and then of course I think Freddie questions like the security or the integrity of the barrels to not leak this chemical weapon or something. And Frank's like, "No, it's the army, it's great." And he hits the barrel.
Leak? Hell no, these things were made by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
Oh, fuck!
They pass out, and when the two of them wake up maybe an hour or so later, they find that not only are they feeling like shit after breathing in this chemical, but the barrel in question is now empty. The cadaver is no longer in there. They don't know where it is. And all of the cadaver focused items in their warehouse are now reanimated. So within the freezer where they were storing a cadaver, they hang them on these like, it's almost like a slaughterhouse, like a meat rack, where they have hooks that go into their heads, and they're just hung there with like a plastic bag over them. They can hear the cadaver. He's banging on the door of this freezer. The vivisected dogs they've come to life, and they're panting. You can hear the dog like panting. They ultimately end up calling the owner of the warehouse, guy by the name of Bert, played by Clu Gulager. It's an interesting name to say out loud. And when he arrives, he's so determined on keeping this hush hush, whatever the hell is happening. He can't have this bad rep on his business. So he suggests across the way, there's like a cemetery next to this warehouse, and then adjacent to that is a mortuary, a morgue, where they have a crematorium. And Bert, the owner of the warehouse, is friends with Ernie, who runs the crematorium, and he says, essentially, well, we just need to get rid of all the evidence. And they end up letting the cadaver out of the freezer, and who's like this big naked man. And there's some pretty funny moments with his kind of like puppetry, body double, prosthetic effects that they use. But the movie kind of breaks that wall of like, there's that rule that like, oh, you had to hit zombies in the head to kill them. And this movie does away with that. And they try hitting it in the head with like a pickaxe, and it doesn't kill it. And so the character Freddy is like, you mean the movie lied?
You mean the movie lied?
Talking about Night of the Living Dead, where you had to shoot them in the brain, that would kill them. And in this, that does not work. So they end up dismembering this person. And even when you cut these zombies down into their most minuscule parts, they're still moving. They're still twitching.
What the hell is in those bags?
Rabid weasels.
What?
And they go over to the mortuary, and they convince Ernie to let them use the crematorium, where they burn these trash bags full of this zombie guy that they've cut into pieces, and the dogs and everything. And once that chemical starts burning and the smoke goes up into the air, we have a big thunderstorm where we get this like chemical infused rain starts pouring down onto this surrounding town, triggered by, again, the smoke of this crematorium. Now, while this is going on, like I said, Freddy has his whole gang of buddies. They are the punk rock deadbeats who are waiting for him to get off work. They decide, instead of sitting right in front of the warehouse where he works, let's go party in the cemetery next door. So you have this acid rain that starts falling down.
The fuck was that?
It hits everything in the cemetery, and then all of the corpses. And the thing that I love about this movie, again, is that it starts just breaking all these expectations and walls of what was the zombie genre. So it's not just like the recently dead that start coming up out of the ground. It's the entire like zombie apocalypse, if you will, begins with just a literal skeleton with eyeballs popping up out of the ground. And you can even see the wooden dowel that they use to animate its mouth opening in the shot. But I love that about this movie, that it's not just, all of the zombies aren't just extras with makeup. They have some really, really good practical effects in this movie. There's one scene in particular where the main characters end up capturing one of the zombies, and they kind of pull the zombie through an open window. And because she is so desiccated and decayed, she kind of like rips in half, and then they end up just tying down this torso to a bed in the mortuary, and you can see like her spine is like flopping around like a tail, and it's really good practical effects on this zombie. And she's just it's just like skeletal, with like the skin is like shrink wrapped to her, and she's got this red hair, and she's really nasty. It scared the shit out of me when I was a kid. It's with that zombie that, again, they keep pushing the limits of the genre, where you learn that the zombies in this film experience a physical pain now that they have reanimated because of this chemical. And she talks about she can feel herself like rotting away.
I can feel myself rot.
And there's a pain of being dead, which, like, again, as a kid, I'm watching this and it's just like scaring the shit out of me that these zombies are, again, they're not just shambling extras with makeup. They have personality. All the zombies can like speak in this film. They have a level of intelligence, and there is apparently a pain with being dead. And thing number two that this movie is responsible for in the zombie genre is, as this skeletal woman confesses, the only way to make this pain stop is by eating brains.
Eating brains. How does that make you feel?
It makes the pain go away.
So Return of the Living Dead was the first zombie movie to introduce the idea that zombies eat brains and they like brains. I feel like if you ask most people, like, oh, what do the zombies in the Romero movies say? I bet you a lot of people will say brains, even though the zombies in the Romero movies don't actually speak. Yeah, other than the fact that the zombies, again, they have this intelligence. They plan. There's scenes where once this like zombie horde, this like army has formed, about halfway ish into the movie, our main characters end up getting kind of like isolated and trapped within this mortuary slash warehouse. That's kind of like the whole setting. It's very small in terms of its scope. This whole like horde of zombies is just outside of the buildings, but as different people arrive, at one point there's like paramedics, and another point there's like police that show up. The zombies are like aware enough to where they will hide in like the woods and they will remain out of sight. And then once like paramedics show up and they get out of the ambulance, like the zombies like swarm in, and then, you know, one of the zombies will get on their radio and he'll be like, "Oh, send more paramedics."
Send more cops.
So they get more people in there to eat more brains. And the performances are all great. Like Clu Gulager as Bert, the owner of the warehouse, is fantastic. I used to think he was such a badass when I was a kid. Frank is amazing. The music is really cool. There's a lot of like, they feature a lot of punk rock bands from LA.
Baby, your asphalt eater hum 10. The Hodads and Grammy say you reach top and so do the dead. Through the lights, the serpent dead.
And it's a very bleak movie. As I said, like the characters in this film remain so isolated and so trapped in this very small, focused setting. And then I don't want to spoil the movie too much, but the whole thing just has a very bleak, kind of nihilistic outlook on humanity. And I can't forget to point out that it has one of the best zombies. No, it's the best zombie, one of the best movie monsters ever filmed, who is known as the Tar Man, which is, it's one part incredible practical effects with his suit, where he just, you can see his bones and he's very skeletal, and all of his like flesh and sinew just has this black, like tarry quality to it, where it's just hanging off of him because he's spent so much time in this barrel. He's like terrifying looking design. And then whoever the actor was that actually portrayed him physically, the way that he moved, he looks like he's just legitimately not in control of his limbs. Such a good job. And again, he's cognizant. There is an intelligence with him, and he speaks. As I said, maybe my favorite horror movie of all time. I watch it multiple times a year. It is infinitely rewatchable. It is so good. There are some scenes of nudity, if that bothers people. There's also some like really gnarly most visceral, like zombies biting heads effects I've seen in a movie. That goes to this day. Great movie. Can't recommend it enough. Go check it out if you want something spooky to watch and you're looking for something new. I thank you if you're still here watching. Peace.